What's going on, big boy?
Not much, buddy. Not much. Back in the swing of things. Back in the swing. I saw Snowden.
Oh, jealous.
I saw LBJ. So with Snowden,
I'd like to call the meeting to order, please.
LBJ, Bob
I want to welcome all of the committee members of the Budget Committee and any visiting councillors. First of all, I just want to welcome, there's some students from Ryerson University that are populating our seats in the back, so I want to welcome you. I'm not too sure what program you're from, but welcome to the Budget Committee at City Council. Just a reminder to everybody that you can follow us on toronto.ca/council, or you can actually watch on YouTube at Toronto City Council Live. Are there any declarations of possible conflict under the Interest Act? Seeing none. Can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of the Budget Committee meeting of June 22nd, 2016? Councillor DiCiano will move that. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So we're going to get on to the agenda. I have two new items of business that I would like to add. First is a confidential report from the Economic Development and Culture concerning the Toronto Centre for the Arts. Can I have a motion to add new business? Councillor Campbell will move that. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And then the second item is from myself about the proposed schedule for meetings in the 2017 budget cycle. Can I have a motion to add business to that? Councillor DiCiano will move that. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So I'll just hold those two items down. We'll deal with them at the end. Okay, on to the yellow paper. BU 23.1 operating variance for the 6-month period ending June 30th, 2016. Okay, we'll hold that down for questions. BU 23.2, the capital variance report for 6-month period ending June 30th, 2016. Okay, Councillor Carroll will hold that down. BU 23.3, the transfer of funds from construction hoarding sign fee reserve fund and allocation to the Toronto Arts Council for the arts in the parks. Councillor Campbell has moved staff recommendations. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. BU 23.4, the budget adjustment federal homelessness partnering strategy 2016. Councillor Campbell will hold that. BU 23.5, Toronto Water 2016 capital budget and the 2017 to 25 capital plan budget adjustments. Councillor Campbell has moved. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. BU 23.6, the Transportation Services 2016 capital budget adjustments. Any questions? Councillor Layton? It came. It was circulated on yellow? Okay, so you're holding that, Councillor Layton? Okay. 23.7, Reserves and Reserve Fund Variance Report, June 30th, 2016. Councillor Campbell is holding that. BU 23.8, the development 2015 Development Charge Reserve Fund Statement. Councillor Campbell is holding. BU 23.9, Facilities, Real Estate, Environment and Energy 2016 Capital Budget and 2016 to 25 Capital Plan Adjustments and Accelerations and Deferrals. Councillor Campbell's moving. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. BU 23.10, Toronto Police Services Board 2016 Operating Variance Report for the period ending March 31st, 2016. Councillor Campbell's moving. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We'll do the new items now. Hopefully we can just move them quickly. 23.11, the adjustment to the 2016-25 Economic Development and Cultural Capital Plan about the Toronto Centre for the Arts. Has everybody had an opportunity to read it? Do you want to move that or just hold it down for the moment?
Well, I've read it. I can move it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm fine moving it too.
People read the purple?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've read it.
Okay, do you want to move it then? Sure. Councillor Carroll move that. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And 23.12, the meeting schedule. Anybody want to move that? Councillor DeChannel move that. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay. So we'll go to the operating variance. First item, we're going to have questions of budget committee members and outside. We do it a little bit differently, remember? So we'll do a budget committee members. Any questions of staff? Or did we, first of all, is there, I'm just wondering, I don't think we need a report on this. It's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, any questions of staff? From budget committee members? We're working. Okay, seeing none, we'll go to outside councils. Councillor Perks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome back. My question has to do with the tax-supported variance summary that goes pages 1, 2, and 3 in the report, specifically the bullet points about Toronto building and city planning. In both of those instances, the materials discussed, in one case 4.81 positive variance, and the second one 4.426 million positive variance. Those are not savings, are they? Those are actually under expenditure in full cost recovery fee-based programs.
So through you, Mr. Chair, it's actually additional revenue than what was budgeted. So we have, as you know, gross revenue net budgets in the case of city planning. In the case of city building, it's actually a net revenue budget because revenues exceed the costs as we account for everyone, and it's all located there. So year-to-date, because this is about year-to-date variance, as of the 6-month period, what they thought was going to come in as revenue on the actual experience side was higher than what had been planned for the 6-month period. So it's higher revenue volume than what had been anticipated for the 6-month period for 16.
Right, okay, so then I guess I would go along to the projected year end. We hit last year end on building permit applications, development applications, and committee of adjustment applications. So not the regular program of planning, but all things which are supposed to be full cost recovery, fee-based programs. We had money left over at the end of the year. Now, in some cases, I understand that has to do with there might be a complex application that takes more than 1 year. I'm wondering two things. First, when we're showing tax-based programs, can we not show stuff that's full cost recovery because it's not tax-based, it's fee-based? Can we find some other way to show that? And secondly, for particularly buildings and planning, I'm concerned that we're now collecting more than we spend on those full cost recovery programs year after year after year. I'm wondering if we could get some kind of a note supplementary by the time this gets to council so we can make sure we're not overcharging or understaffing, whichever it is.
Right. So I guess a few points on that. So through you, Mr. Chair, in the case of city planning, their entire program has a series of services or activities of which a portion of it, the development application review process, attributes or collects or attracts full cost recovery fees, right? So there are other parts of that program that do not. For that portion, it's full cost recovery, and actually you will see a report shortly that has done a review over the last 4 or 5 year period to assess whether we are maintaining full cost recovery, because that's an exercise we have to maintain. By law, we are not allowed to exceed that cost. Right?
Yes.
However, in year, if the actual volume is higher, because, for example, as you said, there was a very large ticketed revenue item, then we actually have a reserve fund that at year end goes back into that reserve and is then used as we need to ensure that the staff can continue with that work in the following year, because that service has to be provided if the application hadn't been concluded. In the case of Toronto Building, that too is based on a full costing model and gets reviewed, and in this case, by legislation, it has to go into their reserve, and then it's brought forward. So we are ensuring that anything above plan is actually going back in the reserve for the purpose it was intended.
So that's helpful, and what I was wondering is if it's possible to have something supplementary to this report in time for council. I know that executive's quite close, that explains that those two ones, and in planning, by the way, it specifically references development application fees and committee adjustment fees, so it's not the rest of the program.
Right.
That explains that these are, in fact, not tax-supported savings, because they're referred to the above-mentioned savings. They're not tax-supported in the paragraph just below the bullet points on page 2. Okay? So I was wondering if I think members of council reading this document would think that we actually were up between these two departments $9 million on our operating tax-supported budget, and we're not. Page 2 of the committee report.
Mr. Libby, I'd like to answer that.
Chair, I hope everybody can hear me. I don't have a mic. But the increases in volumes in fees for planning and the increase in the volume increases we've seen in building have now persisted well over 3 years. That information is information that we are now very actively putting together in our case budget, in our budget for both those departments. Last year in building, we actually did add some resources because of volumes, and we'll be looking critically at that for planning as well this year in our forthcoming budget submissions. So the answer to the question will be informed by the budget submissions that we make.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Burks. Councillor Davis?
There's the predictable one. There are a number of divisions where there are savings or they're under budget, not savings, they're under budget as a result of vacancies. Vacancies.
In some cases.
Are we at the same level of vacancies in these divisions as before? And I mean, what really are we doing? We certainly, as councillors here consistently, we can't get our staff hired. If you can do something about that, really, could you do something about that? Are the vacancy rates in these divisions the same, higher, lower, compared to previous years?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, if you look at pages 4 and 5, year-to-date and year-end, even though the table on page 5 says year-to-date, but that's the year-end. Pages 4 and 5 of the report. So what we've done is actually extract out for you vacancies in terms of service delivery or operations from capital, and giving you a sense of what the vacancy rate is at the 6-month period for operating, because with capital, as you know, it's fairly dependent on the timing of when the project's starting. So we wanted to bring that clarity. Projection to year end is really showing for city operations that after you take into account regular gapping, there's a projection of 0, which is saying that people are getting very close to being at full complement, subject to gapping.
So you have not provided this analysis prior to now?
We've always had both operating and capital, but we've brought clarity to it to show you the difference between those that are specific to capital projects from the ongoing operations.
So,
And so really we're looking at vacancies in terms of service.
you're saying that at the end of the year, we will have 0% gapping, 0% vacancies in city operations.
After gapping, that's the projection that staff have given us across the organization for city operations, based on a series of assumptions around the hiring process and availability of the appropriate staff, of candidates.
So we will get to see the comparators of this chart, which we haven't seen before, at the third quarter and year end.
That's correct.
Okay. There was another snow removal. There's a reference to savings as a result of snow removal, and I'm struggling to actually read the numbers in this small table to understand it. So is there someone here from Transportation Operations? How much did we save last year or this winter from last half of the winter? 16 million? How much is from, some of it is from salt usage and some is from lower costs. It's just that when we have a winter where we have no snow, everyone's curious to know, what did we save? And I know there are standby costs that are at some percentage, like 80% of the total cost.
Through the chair, I believe that is in the order in terms of what we're projecting in terms of savings, again, with the mild winter that we had at the beginning of the year and then forecasted again to the end. I mean, it's a forecast at this point, but we are forecasting savings over expenditures which we occurred in the previous year.
But is there a breakdown between the costs of the surface versus the salt usage? Maybe I'll ask you that later, because I'm curious about that. There was also, in transportation services, because of the utility cut repair, underachieved revenue. That comes from our utilities who pay us for utility cut repairs?
Yeah, through the chair, there is an administration fee that is charged to the utility companies when they submit an application for a utility cut, which then translates to a formal cut repair by Transportation Services. So we're forecasting, based on where we stand today in terms of the number of cuts that are forecast to be completed this year, less than what we had budgeted for, so that correspondingly there's a reduction in revenue associated with the decreased volume.
But aren't there savings on the other side of not doing that work?
Through the chair, there are savings with respect to overall costs, but there is an administration fee which nets the city some additional revenue that won't be realized as a result of the number of cuts not meeting our original projections.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. The 5 minutes is up.
Oh.
Mr. Budget Chief, if you would, is it possible just to do a couple of questions back in committee that have arisen out
Yeah, it's up to
questions?
the committee wants to do a second.
Maybe like 2 minutes worth of questions, just about a couple of
Like
things.
I have a couple of Councillor Burnside, so we'll go back into committee then for a couple of questions. Councillor Burnside had his name up.
Oh,
first. I can go with
please.
him.
Thank you. This was just for the, under the fire services with the WSIB. It was up about almost $5 million for WSIB claims, and it says here that it mostly to do with change in provincial legislation. Was there any compensation provided for by the province, or does the city just have to eat all that?
For you, Mr. Chair, no, that's a city cost, provincially determined and city paid.
Okay, thanks. And then, that was nice of them. Okay. That was nice of them. Appreciate that. And then there's a shortfall in the Central Ambulance Communication Center funding. What was that and why? I have it as page 41. Shortfalls in the Central Ambulance Communication Center funding. Toronto Paramedic Services, yeah.
Through the chair, we have been in discussions with the province to secure the 100% funding for the communication center. There are costs that they haven't covered that we are negotiating with them now to cover. But there is a slight shortfall in that program.
Sorry, what's slight mean?
I believe it was in the neighborhood of 500,000 on a 4 million budget, but I would have to check the number.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much. On the fire, the reference to the WSIB claims for 2016, when preparing the fire services budget, 2016 operating budget, was part of the strategy to balance the budget adjusting the anticipated WSIB rates? Was part of the strategy changing that projected number?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, the strategy was not to change the projected number. We've been trying essentially to absorb the cost. It's presumptive cancers that are retroactive to 1961, and the province continues to add those cancers that are eligible. So we've been managing these costs annually through the fire as an operating budget to try to see how much of that could be absorbed. And so we have new ones that are coming on. We don't really have the quantum in advance of when it actually occurs based on eligibility, so we're just managing.
And that's what's added the additional on, but we didn't anticipate a lower rate of WSIB contributions.
Where it was, we knew there were some other possibilities
Okay.
coming. We've always been over the WSIB as long as I've been here, last 5 years. We've not been budgeting enough money for WSIB claims. And again, this year we have for something for cancer, adding for additional recurring.
Are there any, are we anticipating additional cancers being added in the near future, next couple of years? Something we should be budgeting for, or?
Through the chair, the final presumptive cancer comes on stream on January 1st of next year, that's skin cancer.
Okay. Can we just make sure that we've got that calculation in the 2017 budget? Because instead of doing a variance, maybe just including that as an upfront. The second one, the first bullet point on that section of the over expenditures, and I'm trying to find it in the budget preparations. Did we not increase the amount of the Toronto Hydro dividend income in for the 2017 budget? Or I can't remember if we did. I know we did 2016. I know we did for the TPA, but did we do it for hydro as well?
Mr. Chair, yes, we had a one-time increase. I believe it was $10 million.
So is that above, or how much is it this time? Because we have 24 million for that whole list. How much is the Toronto Hydro dividend income coming up unfavorable of that 24 million, 25 million? Maybe in there, I just didn't.
We'll get back to you. We'll get back to you on that, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. And just on page 3, the Toronto Parking Authority projected year end looks like it's $6 million under. How much was it that we increased the Toronto Parking Authority anticipated dividend when we did the 2017 budget in order to balance the 2017 budget?
Yeah, it was 7.7, I believe.
So we increased the dividend 7.7 and we're actually 6 below that. Is that correct? I'm actually really digging the hand signals that
Yeah,
you
no,
guys.
Parking Authority is actually projecting an increase. They're actually up above what they had planned in their own program. So let's not confuse the Parking Authority revenue that they report as part of their program versus the 75% that comes to the city.
So maybe you can explain to me in figure 2 then, that 6 million under is under in their operating, but that doesn't count the amount that they're paying to the city?
So on page 2, that point is as it relates to their own budgeted revenue. So they get their revenue in and pays for their operating, their capital for the year, and then any net revenue, 75% comes to the city. The one-time value that we added was to the income sharing for the city. What they're saying is, as part of their budgeted revenue of their own intake, they're actually up about $6 million due to increase in off-street parking.
They're up. Maybe I'm not getting why it's under then, but.
It's
okay.
over. It's stronger than anticipated revenues. Page 2, that bullet?
I'm on page 3
Okay,
in
and page...
figure 2. Rate supported net variances summary in millions. Toronto Parking Authority,
Under on the revenue side, sorry, means more.
okay.
So they're projecting to be $6 million in excess of what they had planned.
Okay.
For year end.
Okay, thank you. And do we have an answer of the dividend, hydro dividend?
It appears to be coming in about $4 million less than projected based on performance to year end. So to date, we had anticipated to receiving $55 million. We've received just 51, And by year end, we're supposed to get 67.5, which had an additional 10 assigned to it. And projected to year end, we don't plan on achieving that 67. So it'll be 4.1 million less than what we had anticipated based on performance.
Okay, thank you. Speakers to the item? Oh, sorry, Councillor Carroll.
Am I on there? Yes. Most of my questions are in the same area because they are about adjustments. The first one is, and the page in the operating variance report, I'm looking at page 15, page 16. Parks and Rec, the enterprise work management system. There are a couple of adjustments, but this one confuses me. It's about forestry. I should actually have said Parks, Forestry, and Rec because it's actually a forestry position. This is in the budget adjustments. To approve a budget adjustment to increase the urban forestry operating expenditures. I'm not clear on the explanation because it sounds like we're improving, we're actually asking for an increase because we need an extra position to get the installation done. And we're asking for a temporary position, but then it goes on to explain that we're going to need a full-time manager in order for this to work. So is it temporary or not temporary? What are we increasing here?
There are two different opposing issues in force here. One is in order to reconcile the asset data in the existing system and make it transferable to the new system, we're hiring 6 individuals to do the reconciliation. They're hired at the operating budget, but their cost will be recovered from the capital budget for EWMS project. So that's one. Secondly, 2 of the forestry managers are on an acting assignment to the project for the duration of the project, and the remaining are backfills.
Okay. So then it's, who is it is going to require a full-time manager to actually ensure consistent business requirements? Is that just for the life of the project, or is that to run the system that this project installs?
Yes, both.
Both are necessary. So we're going to get an ask for the full-time manager in the future year budget? Okay. And then, well, immediately below that is Octo. The Octo, I love that because it reminds me of a cartoon character from an animation show that is so popular. I'm questioning where the adjustment in year. It goes on to describe the wonderfulness that will be this Office of Transformation, reporting directly to the city manager. But we're adjusting in year 1.175 for this person and 2 persons to work with this person. Do we need to make an in-year adjustment? Is this all going to be ready, and is HR already geared up such that we need to be spending this money in this operating year, or could this be a request as part of the 2017 budget? Because realistically, we know how long it takes to hire people here, especially ones like the description here is this: we're looking for a person who walks, talks, and spits nickels.
Mr. Chair, I believe the positions have been assessed and they're ready to go in terms of once we have the approval.
So HR is ready to go on this? If we do this in-year adjustment, this will get spent in 16?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may start. This adjustment reflects the full annualized value of the office, which is essentially reallocating funds from certain accounts as identified here to another account that we're setting aside. The expectation is that the salaries, once these 3 positions are hired in 16, and startup costs will be what will be spent in 16, and the difference would be to annualize it for the full year. So
what's the full cost of this office?
it's the 1.1. And anticipating about 260,000 that will be spent between startup and the salaries to the end of the year for at least these 3 positions. So the city manager could not be here today. He has another meeting, but the intent was to actually start the process, so that's why this report is going forward now, or this adjustment is going forward now for council approval, and with the hopes that with council approval, that the work can actually begin to start the preparation and planning for a transformation agenda that'll be coming with the long-term financial planning report in December.
In December. So is the financial adjustment here $260,000, or is the financial adjustment, the actual transaction, 1.175? Because it doesn't sound like you need that.
The adjustment is the entire $1.1 million, which is essentially just moving it from certain accounts in non-program to another account in non-program, just to set the budget up. And what you will see is...
Oh, so that technically it would not have to be a new and enhanced in the 2017 budget?
Either way, it's a reallocation. Either way, it's a reallocation.
This way it won't have to be new and enhanced because you put the whole amount in, even though we know right now we're not going to spend it. Okay, I have one other question. The ward boundary review, we're asking for an adjustment of 192,000, zero net. I'm not understanding how is it zero net simply because we're taking it from the reserve fund? And is that the cost of executive committee's vote not to choose from the 5 proposed?
So I'll start with the first question, and then maybe Peter Notaro can add. So the ward boundary review in its entirety was something that was funded from the Innovation Reserve. So this is the residual that did not get spent in 2015 that is getting rebudgeted to complete the work. And Peter, I believe the scope of work is this last part of the question from Executive Committee?
Yes, it is.
Yes, Councillor.
So the 400 was part of the 2015 budget? This is a budget adjustment to increase the 2016 operating budget by 192. Why do we need an increase if we're taking it from within what was allotted in the first place?
So, through you, Mr. Chair, the
Question.
ward boundary review had a full cost of $800,000 that was phased over a few years, all to be funded from a reserve.
Right.
And so last year's phase did not get completed, and because it's reserve funded, we rebudgeted. So at year end, it was anticipated that work was going to get done. There was a different decision by executive committee. So this is the portion of the 800 that did not get spent that we rebudget so that they can actually complete the work, because when it's one time, it reverses out, right? So we're just putting back in the budget.
Why wouldn't it have carried forward?
Well, it's essentially a carry forward of the amount from the following year. It's a residual part of the 800. There's no more that's been added from the original cost of the work.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. I may follow up when you have it before you at executive.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Speakers to the item, outside councillors first. To speak, Councillor Perks, did you like to speak?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to encourage members to support a motion that I believe Councillor Carroll's moving.
Yes.
Having to do with the line of questioning I was going into. The reason this is important, well, there are 2 reasons. The first reason is when you open up your variance report, you see this favorable operating budget from the tax budget between these 2 departments of about $9 million. And you think, oh good, $9 million in savings. But the report nowhere identifies in the text that actually all of that is against full cost recovery programming, so it's money that we can't legally spend on anything but development applications and building permit review. It's all cost recovery. So it's actually not a savings, it's not a positive variance on our tax-supported program. And we've been showing it that way for a while. Every year it looks like we're doing better than we actually are. That's the first reason. The second reason is we need to understand for how many years we've been running these positive variances internally in planning and building. Because I think what's actually happening is we figure out how much it's going to cost to look at a building permit or how much it's going to cost to look at an official plan review. We charge people that, and then we don't have enough staff to do it, so the staff do, well, maybe not as many community meetings, or maybe they settle instead of going to the board because they don't have time, and the community isn't well-served, but we wind up with money sitting in a reserve that we can't spend on anything else. We need to understand whether that's happening, because I'll tell you right now, I have noticed over the last 2 or 3 years, planning staff working harder and getting less done because they have too many files to be able to give them the proper attention. And I'm concerned that we're instead of having enough staff to do a proper job, we're just building up a reserve that we can't use anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. We'll go inside committee speakers. Councillor Carroll, you had it? I don't see Councillor Davis. Councillor Carroll, you have a motion? You want to speak to it first?
Oh, sure. Why don't I get that on the table? Yes, so the motion is pretty straightforward. The Deputy City Manager and CFO report directly to City Council, because that's where this variance report is going, on the fee-based portions of city planning and Toronto Buildings operating variances, separate from the tax-based operations. And I'll just speak briefly. Councillor Brooks came and asked me to move this, and while he was getting the answers to his questions, I guess I'm having the same experience in the suburbs, and that's why I'm moving this for him. I don't want us to become reliant on an overcollection in the fee-based portion to fund the tax-based portions, and when you have a controversial development that sometimes needs a working group, you sometimes hit the wall and the planner says, I really can't do any more evening meetings. And unfortunately, you're dealing with and they're not all this way, but some are controversial and you really need to do the backstroke through it with a working group that has several meetings. But your planner can run out of hours. I'm all for charging all that we need and a little bit more in terms of development applications on some of these big ones. But if we get to the point where the tax-supported is beginning to rely on a surplus, I think that's why we want to separate it out, to make sure that that's not the case, such that the tax-supported part of their departments is cannibalizing the fee-supported, which is where we need the service for our communities.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Any other speakers to the item? Seeing none, unfortunately, you were not at your seat when I asked for outside councillors, Councillor Davis. We'll begin with the amendment by Councillor Carroll. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. The item is amended. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, we'll go to BU 23.2 capital variance report for the 6-month period ending June 30th. Councillor Carroll, you held that down. Councillor Carroll? What's an item?
Yes.
Questions of staff?
Yes, the question is about the section on closing capital budgets out. Sorry, I'm just electronically getting out of operating and into capital here. In the capital, the closed capital projects, had a look at the appendix that shows us the projects, and they are projects from a few years ago. I'm just wondering, I don't recall us actually doing the closed report and actually doing the financial transfers back to source at this point in the year. I can remember it happening as part of the budget process, and so the financial impact it had could sometimes have an impact on our overall pro forma. But here we're doing it ahead of time and dispositioning it away such to say we're going to have a conversation about closed capital projects and what monies they net in the context of the budget for the next year.
So through you, Mr. Chair, we've been doing this quarterly, probably for the last 4 or 5 years, with a huge emphasis.
Yeah.
Reporting and closing and reporting. So we have been doing this as part of the quarterly quarterly variance report. Now at year end, there are better results when we actually have a full sense of the final disposition of a series of projects, so you see more closure as part of the year end, but we are doing this quarterly.
So you've been doing it on this, oh, thank you. You've been doing it on this smaller basis all along.
All along, and then we do have a closed capital report that we do kind of as part of the year-end effort as well.
So the year-end one would likely come before we're adopting the budget for the next year?
No, typically it comes after because we have to wait for year-end results, which don't happen until the spring.
So is there a point in the budget process where, would it be an onerous request if we were to say during the budget process, we want to get as near as you can what impact this has had over the past year?
So as part of the budget process, we're reviewing all active projects to ensure that they still need to continue. If they are complete, of course, then this is where we then relegate them to this report, where we then start the closures. So there is a very detailed review of all projects, and clearly only those projects that are active get budgeted. So if they're not active, then they're going through this process of closure, partial closure, full closure.
And in most of these cases, it's a much smaller amount going back to capital from current. But in the case of debt, which is where the bulk of this money was committed, in most of these cases, this is debt that wasn't let in the first place? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Any other questions? Councillor Campbell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So at first glance, it looks like 50 capital projects are being closed and the savings or the money's not spent are 51 million, which sounds like a really good news story. And then when you look at the very, very, very fine print in Appendix 2, and actually if we could make the font a little smaller, we could save some money on paper, right? That would be a good idea. Anyway. So I look at, so for example, under solid waste management, there's something on, this is on the flip side, the back side of Appendix 2. Well, it's in Appendix 2. It's not, there's no page number, but it's the second page of Appendix 2. And and so there's something called mandatory diversion enforcement, which there was budgeted 600, well, it looks like 600,000, but I guess it was 500,000 and was unspent. So that's not really a savings, that's money not spent. Any comment on that? Or is there somebody here from solid waste? Or I don't expect you to know about solid waste there, Josie, but.
Just on the face of it, through you, Mr. Chair, is that there were two sub-projects, one in 2009 and one in 2011 of 1.2 in total. Looks like only the 11 project actually proceeded underspent, and the 100,000 project looks like it never actually happened, so it just may have been a full closure. But Vince Rotz is here from Solid Waste.
So just to elaborate on what Josie said through the chair, monies with respect to mandatory enforcement were deferred until we had completed the long-term strategy, which council approved this July. So for our budget submission in 2017, we have identified or reallocated funds for enforcement. So you'll see that coming forward as part of the 17 budget process.
Okay, so then, I mean, as I go down this list, and you can pick any one of a number of projects, the actual expenditure is considerably under the project cost, and it makes me call into question, the way we're estimating. So I look at Keel Valley, project cost was 7 million, actual expenditure 4 million. Down to, the transfer station costs, project cost 520,000, actual cost 145. And I'm just wondering, to what do you attribute some of these fairly wide variances, and what's been, what the division has anticipated its expenditure would be, and then what the actual expenditure was?
So again, through the chair, some of the variances have been attributed to ability to actually get projects completed due to resources and staffing. So the division has had some vacancies with respect to engineers, which we've had difficulty finding qualified appointees or recruitments. We have recently, in fact, filled many of those positions within the last 2 months. So we anticipate that for 17, we will be, in fact, either getting closer or, in fact, achieve our forecast spend rate.
But these are projects that are closed, right? So these are projects that are closing this year, and this is the actual expenditure. So how would the lack of suitable positions filled how would that have affected the budgeted cost? Because, presumably the budgeted cost is your best estimate.
Okay. So specifically with respect to Keel Valley, that was in relation to the amount of our landfill gas that was produced, and in fact, the amount of gas control system that we had to apply. So within the last couple of years, the amount of landfill gas has significantly reduced, where we don't in fact need to have as much control system in place for the collection of landfill gas at Keel Valley. With respect to the transfer stations, again, we haven't been able to finish all the management or state of good repair, seeing that, in fact, there wasn't a need, or we're able to defer for future years.
Okay, so I'll just move on to another. How does over budgeting and underspending affect us from a financial standpoint? Because I know we would rather not do that.
So there's, I guess, two types of over budgeting. Over budgeting in the sense that you anticipate the value that you're going to spend in the current year is actually less than what you think you're going to get done. And we have been working very hard at working with all the divisions and agencies to align spending and spending capacity to actual activities. And it's actually one of our key strategies for 2017, because if you are budgeting at a higher value than you're actually going to complete, then the monies are being allocated to that and not to other things. So, and it results in funds being carried forward to the following year, and much like a first in, first out, you have to complete that work before you get on to the next. So it's adding to the capacity of what people are doing. So we're trying to streamline that based on more realistic alignment.
Am I at 6 minutes, Mr. Chair? Is that,
You are. I was giving you a little bit of leeway there.
All right, okay, thank you.
Okay. Also, Mike, Dan, did you want to speak to that quickly? And then we'll go on to the next.
Through the chair, just one other point to highlight. When it comes to construction projects in particular, at the end of a construction project, there will be allowances, typically a contingency allowance that will be unspent. So it's good news. We award the contract with typically about a 10% contingency allowance in. When the project is completed and there are no unforeseen conditions that arise, it's money that is unspent and then it is returned back to the city. So that's what you're seeing in a lot of those projects that are construction related.
Thank you. Any other questions, committee members? Okay, outside Councillor Davis, you have some questions?
I just wondered about this projects for 2016, a savings in debt funding of 27, almost 28 million. So how does that debt financing, when we borrow and for how much, happen? I know there was some great debate last year about this. So what happens to this 27 million? The report says debt is applied only, it says the unspent debt portion will generally not be issued.
So through you, Mr. Chair, a project may have full debt or may have other sources of funding. If it has other sources of funding, we always utilize other people's money first, and debt is the last thing to be issued.
Right.
So third-party, reserves, debt. So as you're going through the project and there are actual costs assigned, we are extracting or utilizing those other funds. If the project was fully debt funded, we would be borrowing X millions based on what we think the spending's going to be, but we're only to the point of actual spending. So we wouldn't be borrowing in advance of the entire project cost, but based on what's actually being spent. So as a result, if you're underspent, we're not issuing the debt, so we're avoiding debt issuance.
But it also says unspent funds go back to the source of the funding. So I presume if it's a one-third, 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 or 50/50, or there's other sources of funding, that the savings, are you saying the savings associated with the final cost are refunded equally according to the same percentage of, if it comes in at 80% of costs, or do we keep the other money and
So in the,
avoid debt?
yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, in the case of third-party funding, such as another order of government, it's claims-based, right? So there's a value of a third, a third, a third. So as we are trying to get the funding for expenses that have been incurred, we have to put claims in to get that funding up to that third. So again, in the overall scheme of things, if the project is underspent, yes, you'd have to cap it at those values for each of those funding sources. And in the case of third-party funding, they're not actually giving us the money. In the case of a reserve, we've allocated it, but it becomes an uncommitted amount. And in the case of debt, we don't issue.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I'll take it into committee. Actually, speakers to the item. Anybody want to speak? Outside committee, inside committee? Councillor Carroll, then Layton.
Yes, I'm not going to move a motion because I'm not 100% sure how I want it to look. I'm going to go back and look at the other closed capital projects reports. My reason for asking about this and my concern, and it actually is a follow-on now from Councillor Davis's question, is that with regards to debt, we're kind of we're sitting here thinking, oh, this is great, it's debt and it was never let. But what it also is, what that means is it's unattributed debt ceiling. We thought we were at our ceiling, turns out 27 million less. This is unattributed debt ceiling, and yet we get a steady diet of you can't do anything, you're at your ceiling. And so I'm inclined to say, I don't mind being slightly over budgeted in capital. I don't mind the fact that we build in that discretionary fund. What construction contractor wouldn't build in 10%? That's fine. I do worry about whether or not they actually go ahead and spend it. When they don't spend it, when a project doesn't happen at all, when it doesn't get off the ground, those are big concerns. When a department-wide in their capital program gets down to 30 and 40%, that worries me. All of the projections here speak to, by the end of the year, we expect to be at 70, we expect to be at 80. The TTC, as you'll have read in the paper, is actually adjusting their finances to say that they're going to start spending at 90 to 100%. That's going to require a high degree of effectiveness. But what worries me and what I'm looking at in the closed capital accounts report is what that means is not just that we don't get stuff done, that we keep sending out the rhetoric that, oh, what a terrible city, it's at its debt ceiling. And then if we quietly close these and knock back 27 million that debt never got issued, and there's another 30 million in this report, another 12 million in this report, we're not at our ceiling. And that's standing in the way of what is a very important decision that we are going to end up having to make to get through the next couple of years and to get projects like major transit projects like the subway off the ground, the Gardner off the ground. We're actually contemplating what can we do with our 15% debt ceiling. Well, if we're not at it, then we actually do have some room to look at. So I think what we really want to do, and I'll maybe work with the chief between now and when he is bringing this variance to executive to talk about how do we make sure that while it's in the budget process calendar, not after it, as the chief planner told us, while we're having our budget conversations is when we want to look at how much unattributed debt ceiling was there in last year's budget, all in one number, so that we really know, are we 1 foot on a banana peel? Are we in fact very responsible? and this report shows it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege and a great honor to today present the Councillor Janet Davis Award for Attention to Detail in Appendices to Councillor John Campbell for his work discovering CSW 004/23, the mandatory diversion enforcement number. Congratulations, Councillor Campbell. I'm glad to see you had a productive weekend.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. And congratulations too, by the way.
You can't receive it until I receive it
Any other
first.
speakers to the item? Outside councillors?
Well,
Sir.
the one thing that's also hidden in here is the famous Ward 39 Parks dedication that I hope we never do again, which is we took a sports field capital allocation and redirected it to 3 other parks using a bunch of other sources of funding, which is completely unacceptable and wrong, and I hope we never do again. So now there was an allocation in here for a special sports field that was supposed to be built with artificial turf, a big new park, and instead it got reallocated to 3 parks in Ward 39, and all of you, I think, voted for it.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you, Councillor Burnside, because this is an inappropriate use of the sports field money, because we know absolutely we need new sports fields. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Councillor Davis, and I sure won't be letting that go through again this year if it comes about, so. Any other speakers? Seeing none, all in favor of the item? All opposed? That's carried. Okay. BU 23.4, budget adjustment, federal homelessness partnering strategy. Councillor Campbell, you held that down. Question?
Quick question. At what point is the $3,200,000 received from the federal government supposed to be spent?
Go ahead, Glenn. I believe it's March 31st, 17.
And have we received the money? Or is it, how does this work? And what are we spending the money on?
Through the chair to the councillor, it's like a grant money that the federal government gives to us, and we generally pass it on to community agencies. We have started to receive the money. They made the announcement in the spring, but they didn't make the allocation announcement. I think we got that in the summer, and now we need to do the budget adjustment so that we can start spending the money.
So is this an effective way to spend money? This is a lot of money to be spending it in such a rushed way. Can this money, are you confident the money can be?
Through the chair, the money is being spent under the council-approved Housing Stability Service Plan. So there is quite a detailed policy framework that Shelter Support and Housing uses to administer the money, and it is completely consistent with work that's already underway.
And is this for any capital improvements in this that's involved, or is it all?
Primarily program.
Primarily, but there is a small percentage that can be used for capital as well.
Is that defined by the agreement?
Generally, yes. They tell us how much they would like to see going to programming versus capital.
So, okay, let me ask this question differently then. Can this money produce long-term benefits, or is it really just a short-term fix and assistance for those in need?
Through the chair to the councillor, this program has never been a permanent program. It does come up for renewal. I think it's every 4 years, and then we hope that they renew the program. There are many community agencies that rely on that funding, and to lose it, it would destabilize a lot of the homelessness supports that we help.
So this was not an unexpected grant.
It was expected after the federal budget announcement. What they didn't tell us was how much we're getting.
But you said that because agencies rely on this money, which would make me think that if they're relying on it, they've had it before, and there's a predictability to it. So is there a predictability? There can't be a predictability to something that's only been offered once by a new government.
It's predictable in that it's an agreement that of a set amount, like our base amount is about 17 million. This top-up would put it to about 20, and then I think it's 4 million in 2017, so we would be getting in around 20 million. It's predictable in that we signed the agreement with the federal government for 4 years saying that we're going to get this money and you can use it for the future.
And so can you just give me an example as to how the money will be spent and what sorts of supports it will provide?
Through the chair to the council, it provides grant money to many agencies such as drop-ins, housing help providers, housing follow-up agencies. They tend to be what we call the wraparound supports for helping people get into housing. The criteria of the program is a housing first principle, so any business case or business plan that we put to the federal government has to be meeting that criteria, and one of the ones that they underscore is a housing first approach.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Carol had a question?
Yes, Councillor Campbell's questions actually point to both this infusion. This is an operating pot of money, but it's not unlike the infrastructure stimulus money, is it? Isn't it the case that the item before us now was preceded by a lot of city staff to ministry staff conversation about, we have a policy goal to do with homelessness, you got a program, let's talk about if we were to give some of that money to your program, what would happen with it? So the very same questions Councillor Campbell is asking, the federal government has had an opportunity to ask before they even agree to give us this money. Isn't that the case?
Through the chair to the council, yes, we do get invited to many roundtables and opportunities to talk about advancing this portfolio. From our perspective, what we would like it to be is a permanent funding source so that we don't have to we have some predictability.
Right, but you likely get the challenge back from the other order of government, whichever is often, you have a program, you just want money for it. What do I do about the municipalities where there is no program and I still have to deal with homelessness? So you guys get X. What will you do with it? It's along those lines.
Through the chair of the council, yes, we have to document the business plan and provide it to the federal government to make sure that it meets their criteria. Sometimes they say that, no, that program is not something we would support with this money.
Right. And so, well, this is an item that allows for program dollars in infusion. It begs the question, we're looking at phase one monies now in terms of capital infrastructure. In phase two, there is talk of housing and homelessness. Do we have a similar program for if a capital gift comes our way? Because the federal government has capital goals in this area as well that they're already talking about in their phase two infrastructure funding. Did we adopt a capital program as well, such that we'd be able to act on it quickly if that comes our way?
Through the chair of the council, I'm not aware of anything on the horizon that would fit what you're talking about right now.
I would just add through the chair, yes, we've been working with, certainly work with the intergovernmental staff in the city manager's office in those conversations with the federal government about infrastructure money as it relates to housing.
Yes, so because that's the word we heard at FCM last week, in fact, and in fact in the paper, that some of it is going to be directed again on a capital basis to housing and homelessness. Under homelessness, housing opportunities now talked about us actually needing more shelter-based or supportive housing with all the wraparounds, that we needed actually more bricks and mortar spaces. So we have something that we could project onto the phase two program.
Working with colleagues in the Affordable Housing Office, Shelter Support and Housing, and Toronto Community Housing, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Any other questions? Seeing none, any comments? Speakers, Councillor Carroll? Oh, sorry, you had, I'm sorry. Okay, Councillor Davis had a question.
I'm just wondering where, a couple of things. One of them, has to do with the surplus for 2015. The year-end surplus for 2015 gets allocated to certain reserves. Can you point out which reserves, how much there was, and where that money got allocated? And is there a way to identify that in these statements? Because it's the city manager who directs those to underfunded reserves, or whatever the terminology is.
I think that's the next report, Councillor.
You're on the next item. We're on 23.4, Councillor.
Talking about getting free money from JP.
I think you're referring to the next item.
Well, when it runs out, then we won't.
I'm talking about reserve and reserve fund variance report.
We're not there yet. We're not there.
Oh.
Okay. Hold on to that question, though.
Oh, well, hold on,
Any
I'm sure
speakers
I
to
have
the
some
item,
here,
Councillor
too.
Carroll?
Yes, just quickly, because Councillor Campbell's questions really remind us that a lot of the work we did to make sure that we would be able to take advantage if funds arrived to continue on this path happened in 2013. And a lot of work at that time, that the huge housing opportunities now exercise that Councillor Mamalidi chaired, and then the work of the Affordable Housing Committee and Shelter Housing Support meant that if more monies came our way, we actually do have a robust program to attribute this to. The issue remains, we get it in dribs and drabs. We have to be really careful how we allocate it, because it always has an end date. That is the holy grail, getting a federal program where they finally say this is sustainable funding, it's going to be there for as long as we're in office. Even that would be something. But because they don't fund that way, we get it in these odd amounts. But I think you can tell by the uneven dollar amounts that it's sort of a formula per capita basis times what we tell them we're going to do with it, and how much we tell them it would cost. But I think that when we're doing this, and I hate to say it, but when we're doing this, and it's something where most of the policy work and the programs that have resulted were determined a long time ago, an appendix that says a little bit about what will happen with this money allows every councillor here and the councillors who will see this in the council agenda to say, we got some money and here's what we're doing with it. When we get money from any order of government, this report tells us nothing about exactly what will happen with the $3 million. So I think, for a councillor who was elected in 2014, when we decided what we would do with this money in 2013, he needs an appendix. And I think if the danger is we might amend it and change what you do with it, I get that, but you could say that this is the condition of the federal agreement, because it is. And I think it's important to pause and make that point, because there are more funds coming our way. We just heard an announcement last week that suddenly there's $60 million that's going to go into wastewater. Yes, I know. Not our most burning need, but there you have it. When those things come forward, if we decided on the program a long time ago, it's got to be appendiced in here, or we can't announce out good news about ourselves even. That's the only thing that's missing from this otherwise good news report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other speakers to the item. Oh, sorry, Councillor. Nope, you're just moving to, that's, yeah. Okay, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Next item, BU 23.6. Councillor Layton, you held this down?
I've had a chance to review the report, and I'm comfortable moving the recommendations.
Okay. Okay, so 23.6, Councillor Layton's moving that. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Next item, 23.7, Reserve and Reserve Fund Variance Report. Councillor Campbell, you held that down.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of very quick questions. On page 4 of the report, in the table 1, under reserves, what are corporate reserves? So just table 1, corporate reserves. At the end of 2015, $520 million, anticipated to be $375 million, $4 million at the end of this year. What constitutes corporate reserves?
So through you, Mr. Chair, it's actually Appendix A1, page 1 of 10, identifies corporate. So things in there include our working capital, capital financing, council furniture and equipment, council transition,
Okay,
and so on.
okay. And there are, under council, under reserve and council-directed reserve, there's a line item for state of good repair, and that's also under obligatory reserve fund balance of state of good repair. Why the separation, or why the two ledger lines for that?
Through the chair, there are certain state of good repair accounts that were set up by council, and then there are certain other ones by legislation and agreement. And obligatory is by legislation and agreement.
And so what would be distinctive about the two if I were to look at them? I guess I can just look at them here because it is in the appendix then. Okay, thank you. I won't bother you with that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none?
Well, Councillor Davis had one before that was out of sync. Do you want to ask it now?
Outside councillors, we're right at your question then, Councillor Davis.
I just wanted to understand where the reserves were, where the year-end surplus went, in which reserves, and is it possible to identify that in these reports?
So through you, Mr. Chair, we could. This is about now 16 moving forward. As part of year-end surplus, those would have been one-time values that would have been used to chop those up. And in speaking in part to Councillor Perk's issue before, we had a total value of year-end, and we had to put money back into certain reserves, including the building reserve, because that revenue has to go back, as well as city planning, and so we end up with a net surplus. The surplus policy says 75% gets allocated to the capital financing reserve, so 75% of the surplus, or 98 million, went to capital financing.
Right.
Then 32 went to a series of other reserves. And that would have been in the report, page 6 of the year-end variance report that was at council in July, that listed all the reserves that those funds went to.
Okay.
Okay?
All I'm saying is it might be good to identify them in some way, I don't know. As we have to just assume that those reserves, they're identified as reserves requiring, or that are underfunded. So how do we know, looking at a report like this, that we have a reserve that's underfunded? We've just got a report, they're total numbers, you don't tell us really whether this is a reserve that's got liabilities against it, where we need to be looking to bolster that reserve. Do we ever get that kind of analysis, other than on the year-end report?
Through the chair, this variance report deals with actuals. It doesn't actually deal with budgeted commitments greater than this year. They're typically, as part of the budgeting process, is something where we're dealing with all of the uses of reserves. This is
They're all chopped up by individual budget, as opposed to seeing it in a consolidated way.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think what the councillors asked for is really more of a health check on the status of the reserves, which would be different than that would be at a point in time and where we see things trending, as opposed to this is a variance report saying what did we expect to get and how much is in the account versus what we thought we were going to spend. So that's a different kind of a report.
So we've drawn 7.1727 from the tax rate stabilization reserve. So what's the tax rate stabilization reserve supposed to have in it? Did we establish a policy around it? Was it just a one-time made-up thing to put some money in to provide a cushion for the next year? There are other reserves that, I mean, I know each of them have attached to them a purpose, and there's a separate report that does that, and I've read those as well, Councillor Layton, the purpose attached to each of these reserves. But Do we review them?
So through you, Mr. Chair, staff, we do review them. We do have certain reserves for which we have a target or goal amount.
Okay.
That should be in the reserve. So the tax stabilization reserve, we would like to have at least the equivalent of a 1% tax increase available in the reserve.
And who made that policy?
That's a staff policy.
See, there's a good example.
Fiscal prudence policy, financial
So-
management policy. In the case.
And the presumptive, the WSIB and the benefits reserve, we know that the benefits reserve has huge liabilities against it. So where is it supposed to be at? And where should we be, how should we be working towards making sure that that reserve is sufficient?
So, through you, Mr. Chair, that's part of what we look at as part of the year-end process as staff to say, the CFO has a delegated authority to look at what is underfunded, and typically what you do see is the employee benefits reserve getting a top-up, the insurance reserve getting a top-up, and why. Clearly, the police reserves have been underfunded, sick pay, gratuity, and so on. You've seen those trends. But what I'm hearing from you is that you would like a more holistic, maybe with the budget process, sense of where we are in relation to certain
What we
key
need.
corporate reserves and what we need and what we actually have funds for.
How much should we have there for arbitration and legal awards? Is it just based on experience and we pick a number and we say that's,
Councillor, we should be able to achieve that through the budget process. I think
Yeah.
I'll endeavor to make sure that that's part of the discussion.
and how much came out of reserves at year end to accommodate the new and enhanced and to balance the budget? 27 million?
So there was about 12.5 million that was used to help fund certain new enhanced programs that came from the Social Housing Stabilization Reserve to help fund the Mayor's Task Force on the TCHC improvements. And there were some, that was kind of the significant draw that we had in this last budget cycle.
I mean, I think it'd be useful to understand where we're drawing from reserves for things that should not be funded through reserves.
Thank you. That's your last question. Any speakers to the item? Seeing none, sorry, Councillor Carroll?
Yeah, I just want to endorse the concern that our guest member is trying to focus us on here. And again, forward this to the process, we really should be making sure that at some point there's an overall look. We get, when we go into our informal reviews, department by department, yes, I have a reserve, and I'd like to tell you as the general manager of this department that my reserve is about to be depleted. So we get it sort of division by division, ABC by ABC. We don't actually ever take this holistic look at it. And I think, again, that is important given that we're going to be looking at our future funding model. We need to look at, if we're looking at changing the revenue model to make us more healthy, it isn't going to be, or shouldn't be, just about, we have a couple of big things we want to build, so we need some new revenue to come in here. In actual fact, the first thing we should be looking at is, are the reserves that we know we need to be a sustainable government are healthy? Because if they're not, that should be the first context. Not we like this one big capital project, but the first context should be, what's the sustainability factor of each of our stabilization reserves, and on and on and on, and what do we need to do with our revenue model, our funding model writ large, to make sure that all of those are sustainable. And on top of that, can we build a Gardner hybrid? Can we build a subway? So I think it's important that at some point in time we have not just the actuals, not just anecdotal reporting on the reserves when we're doing informal discussions, but there really ought to be a point at which we look at what is the state of health of the reserves that we know we must have legislatively or sustainably.
Carol. Any other speakers? Seeing none, all in favor of the item? Opposed? That's carried. We're now on to 23.8, Development Charge Reserve Fund Statement. Councillor Campbell, you held this down.
I did. Through you, Mr. Chair. How are the development charge levies, are those rates set by the city or by the province?
Yeah, like just.
Are you whispering the answer? Is it?
Staff is just sitting down.
Okay.
Getting the appropriate staff.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the development charge rates are calculated through legislation, but ultimately council determines the rates that are adopted.
So what does that mean? It's determined through legislation, but we determine the rates?
The legislation requires us to follow through a number of steps, looking at our capital budget, our growth, and that establishes a ceiling, the maximum rates that can be adopted, and council can then adopt the maximum rates or some lower value, but it establishes a ceiling.
Is there an example where what is the maximum rate, and do we ever levy that maximum rate?
Yes, so council under the most recent bylaw, the 2013 bylaw, has adopted the fully calculated or maximum rates for residential. We do phase in the rates, so they were below the rates, and then we phased it in over 2.5 years.
And why are there development levy charges where there's an allocation to fire, health, library, and police? And EMS for that matter. And how are those monies, let me ask that question first and then I'll ask the subsequent question. So why are there levies for fire, health, library, and so on?
So the legislation requires us to set up a development charge service. So for each program, there's a capital budget for what's needed for growth. So fire had a number of stations. And so the money that is collected for fire goes into reserve fund for fire and is only used to pay for growth-related fire services.
Capital improvements then, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So can these monies, does the city have any flexibility of use of these funds? So for example, there's money that's set aside for fire, there's money that's set aside for library, there's money that's set aside for EMS. Can the city decide to move that money around to something that's more important, for example, for transit or for road, or that it deems more important, such as transit or housing or something? Can these monies be moved around, or are they pegged and frozen?
Fortunately, we do not have that ability. Under legislation set by the province, the reserves are set aside for the specific service. So no, we do not.
And are the funds to be spent within a certain period of time? So let's say we've collected, $23 million for, or let's say $15 million for transit. Do we have to spend it within a certain period for various projects? Does that have to be spent within a certain period of time?
No, there is no expiry or deadline for when we do need to spend it. However, if we are updating the development charges rates, then we do consider reserve fund balances, and the city should be trying to spend those reserve funds to the greatest extent possible.
So just go ahead.
Just through you, that as part of the development charges review process, we're looking at our 10-year plan. All growth-related projects need to be projected in there, and that demonstrates that we plan over at least a 10-year period to undertake those projects. Sometimes it might move into a window of 12 or 14 years, depending on what's going on. But only those projects that are eligible in the plan get the funding, and that's the demonstration of the city's commitment to actually getting that work done.
So if there's money that's been set aside through development charges for the fire department and they don't spend that money, what happens to that money?
They'll spend it one day. It's highly prescriptive.
So it's highly unlikely that it does not get spent unless there's some change in a business model that might change the service delivery, no longer require that particular site, but our goal when we go through the budget process is to maximize the use of all development charge funding against all growth projects first, because that helps us actually reduce the debt and meet our obligations under the development charges bylaw.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Councillor DiCiano?
Yeah, thanks. I just got a quick question. Page 3, where it talks about Schedule A1, which identifies that the balance as of the end of 2015 was $630 million, and then the 10-year commitment is $817 million. So that's a shortfall of $187 million. Was that, is that, what would the shortfall have been last year, roughly? Is it added on to, is the 187, what was the shortfall last year, and then whatever's added on this year, or is that on top of last year? Are we short $200 million a year?
Through the chair, it isn't actually a shortfall because we're showing commitments for capital projects for the next 5 years. So that it would be a point-in-time estimate. I don't have last year's report in front of me, but I expect it would have been similar.
Yeah, okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Yes, I am now looking at the development charges pamphlet that is on the city's website, because it comes up all the time when I'm talking to constituents, and I dare say it does for all councillors. You get development charges, why do you need my money? But I'm noticing now that what isn't clear looking at this user-friendly pamphlet is that one of the most prescriptive things in the legislation about development charges is how often we can look at our own bylaw and review our rates and start over again. Is that still as prescriptive as it was? And as I remember, once you set a bylaw, this just says on October 11th, 2013, City of Toronto passed a development charges bylaw. It doesn't say because it was time and because legislation prescribes that we do da-da-da-da-da-da. Do we have that in user-friendly format somewhere here and I'm missing it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if it's in user-friendly format, but the legislation...
user-friendly about it, yeah.
The legislation requires us to review and establish a new bylaw every 5 years. That's prescribed.
Right, and that's what's missing in Councillor Campbell's questions. You can see where he might think we've got to look at this now because we're doing our look at our revenue model and we're under significant pressure this year. But the most prescriptive thing in the legislation is not the rate we set and what we address, but it's how often we get to revisit it. That's the thing that hamstrings us. And what about the list of things, the services we're allowed to attribute it to according to the bylaw? That can't change very often. And while if you looked at the residents' user-friendly pamphlet here, you would think Spadina subway extension, transit, roads, library, subsidized housing. It looks like we can spend it on anything here. But within those divisions, we still have to meet a very specific definition that within those we are addressing growth. Is that not the case?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's true. There's an eligibility criteria that we need to conform with, and there's a maximum amount that we can actually fund. So we cannot fund 100% of a growth project from development charges. It will require a portion from city funding, usually debt.
Right. So we can play with the rate, but there's still a prescribed ratio. There's a bar we can't go over. So you couldn't say, well, let's just revisit our bylaw and pay for the subway that way. We simply couldn't do it under legislation.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, speakers to the item? You had questions? Sorry, okay, Councillor Davis.
About the build appeal at the OMB for the Scarborough Subway Extension development charges. There's a sentence that says adjustments as a result of this settlement will be shown as 2016 transactions. What does that mean? We had a 10% reduction from that
Any
settlement.
reductions, any changes that are done as a result of this settlement will flow through this year.
Oh, I see.
This is a 2015 report. We're just saying this isn't adjusted at all for that.
Okay, I was going to say, can you show me where the adjustments have been made, and you're saying they haven't been made?
Correct.
Okay, and what is the actual amount that we're going to have to adjust?
I believe it's about $1 million refund. We're not talking something material to these statements, but it will be something that comes through this year.
It's only 1 million? It's amazing how 1 million just seems like nothing.
That's what I'm told.
Okay. And then there is the list of pre-amalgamation development charge reserves. Is there a reason this money is still, I mean, I read the document that says, you know, they're here for growth-related projects. Have there not been growth-related projects since 1998 within these areas to use this money? And there's no Toronto or East York money, so what happened to it?
There used to be three, Mr. Chair.
38, yes.
There used to be a lot more pre-amalgamation money, and we in fact did utilize as much as we could based on eligible projects in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years. So we have the balance, the pre-amalgamation balances were much higher, but we did utilize them, I believe, even prior to the last DC bylaw review. So we continue to look at which projects may be eligible for that funding. It just has to be in the right location, so we know that there's still
It's
a
just
few
that we're
million
using
left.
capital money every budget year. We're dedicating a lot of the capital money into those areas that are priority neighborhoods, which are predominantly in the suburban areas that are exactly these former municipalities. I'm just wondering, how is it that it's not spent?
We look at eligible projects every year. If you go back to the last couple budget cycles in particular, we have actually reduced debt by, I would say, $200-300 million. We've created a lot of capacity by utilizing development charge funding where applicable. So we continue to look at where we can get projects that are in the plan, that are eligible to use that money, because we know that it's sitting there. But it is an active, very active activity that we undertake. So we will keep looking.
Are these millions?
Sorry?
For instance, York, the city of York has had a number of investments, community center, childcare centers, another community center, I think a library. Mark Grimes has had lots of stuff, and.
I haven't had a library.
Okay, not a library.
Through the chair, there are thousands of dollars.
Thousands of dollars.
It says that actually on the third line, and these do have to be spent in the same manner as all the other reserve funds. And there is a view to allocating them first.
Okay, I won't.
Thank you, council. Any speakers to the item? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. I believe we are done. Meeting adjourned. You got through that one?
It's painful.